Thanks, Gabby. Morning. Morning. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today and to share some of our research, along with the thoughts of some leading thinkers and academics on the post-pandemic world. We're going to look back at how the COVID experience has affected our thinking and how it's shaping and accelerating a transformation in society. The last time I stood here was in February 2020, and none of us could foresee the dramatic changes that would be imposed upon us just a matter of a few weeks later. What an extraordinary few years it has been, and what an extraordinary few months we've just lived through. This talk was originally due to be delivered in February this year, and what shocking geopolitical events we've witnessed since then. Consequently, I've heard many people say that COVID seems like a distant memory. And when you think what an historical marker the pandemic was, maybe we should ask ourselves why. In February, the COVID story was quickly superseded by events in Eastern Europe, and yet we still were and are in a global pandemic. On top of this, we were facing and still are facing interest rate and energy price increases, inflation, market uncertainty, and supply chain issues. We felt battered because we were literally, thanks to storms Dudley, Eunice, and Franklin, and climate change remains an existential threat. With all this information, it is natural to feel that the world is a very dark place. But there's also a lot of light. It just doesn't make for headlines, and headlines are not very useful for understanding the world. We are all subject to what is known as the availability heuristic. We estimate probability and imagine effect based on the images supplied by our brain search engine, those things we can easily recall. As Professor Steven Pinker points out, whenever our own experiences are not a random sample of the world, then our judgments can be out of touch with reality. Journalism is an availability machine that loads our memories with images, regardless of how representative of the wider world they are. They affect how we feel and our perception of risk. If I just give you a simple example, in the last 10 years, an average of 306 people per annum have been killed in plane crashes. Yet, according to the World Health Organization, 1.3 million die each year in road traffic accidents. But there is a greater fear of flying than driving, which is influenced by headlines. A plane crash makes headlines, while the daily drip of death from car crashes is considered too boring to report. But in the same way, trends that creep up on us over the years, rather than bursting onto the scene, will be invisible even as they transform the world. So consumers of news can therefore become misinformed about the state of the world and which way it is going. Because of the way we consume news, people often overestimate the things that are bad and underestimate progress over time. As James Harding, former editor of the Times and former director of BBC News says, journalists are there to tell many people what few people know. And some of that information is worrying and risky, which is why it disproportionately ends up on the front pages. News is good at events, but not at gradual developments. Reporting-wise, the events in Ukraine dominated the gradual and positive developments regarding humanity's recovery from the pandemic. And these events are magnified by the infinity pools of 24-hour news and social media platforms. We should control their use and not the other way around. But I'm told, oh, social media is just a tool. Well, I've got a spade in my shed, but it isn't constantly trying to send me messages and asking me to go and look at it. Social media platforms compete for your eyeballs, not just with other platforms, but with the real world around us. So even if you suffer from a fear of missing out, and you should question if you are, then switch off notifications and like the spade in your shed, you choose when to go and use it. Will the pandemic be the hinge event of modern history, or will it be back to business as usual? Suggestions are that the pandemic will not reshape history so much as accelerate it. So much of our behaviour is habitual, and mindfulness, a much misused word, isn't about crystals and whale music. It's about breaking from the habitual and being present, and I mean really present. Change requires a large degree of mindfulness and often occurs on certain dates or life events, the start of a new job, moving house, a birthday, New Year's resolutions. I mean, how many of your 2022 resolutions have yet to be broken? The pandemic was a life event that broke habits. It made people think and reevaluate, and an exit from it could still represent a new personal beginning. However, experience has shown that once disasters have been overcome, and you may feel that this one has, then individuals are very keen to return to their old and maybe wasteful ways. This exit presents a chance for action, but that opportunity may now be fleeting. Have you sleptwalked back into old habits that may not be beneficial to your well-being whilst ditching those pandemic activities that were? When you're stuck in traffic or standing in a packed commuter train, have you experienced feelings of what we termed lockstalgia? That look back to conditions that enhanced aspects of your life that you promised yourself you would hold on to, but now realise you've let go. Over the last 6 months, I've asked people, what will you remember most about your pandemic experience? And whilst I'm aware of the tragic circumstances for some people, most of the answers were overwhelmingly positive. They were about being thankful. They were about pulling together and being together. It's ironic that an event that forced us apart also really brought us closer. The most common response to the surveys mentioned the word time. Comments such as, I felt I had more time for myself and more time for and with the people in my life that really count. As a result, many people have reevaluated their lives and what is important to them, and they've made significant changes. Giving your pandemic experience some thought and maintaining the positives requires conscious effort. This will not happen naturally. In psychology, PPI isn't something you were missold. It stands for positive psychological interventions. You need to put things in place to make things happen. And it can be as simple as disciplined diary management to maintain some of that time that I have been told you valued so much. The virus upended society, and people were, and many still are, disorientated. We've isolated. We have attended meetings online. We've had personal conversations into our laptops, visited museums on our laptops. We've engaged in yoga and fitness classes on our laptops, and we've even shown our body parts on laptops. And some of those were even to medical professionals, as we held doctors' appointments online. Companies changed policies in weeks that would normally have taken years, and governments opened their treasuries like never before. But maybe you felt a sense that whilst everyone is connected, no one's in control. The world we live in is open, it is fast, and it is therefore unstable. The military say we live in a VUCA world. It is volatile, it is uncertain, it is complex, and it is ambiguous. And at no time in our time has that been more illustrated than through the pandemic. People didn't want to be led through this crisis. They wanted the guidance and reassurance of fellow voyagers and the nature of leadership change. Psychologically speaking, hierarchies flattened. Views were sought and all voices had the potential to be mission critical. And maybe for the first time, more of those voices were listened to. I don't know was and should continue to be an acceptable answer. There was a recognition that this was a mystery and not a puzzle with defined rules where probabilities could be calculated. Even though we knew that we were experiencing events that were largely outside of our current models, the demands for probabilities and timeframes were relentless. And yet probabilities are often weak answers that just fill a gap. They just satisfy a demand for an immediate response, but can cause more confusion, especially when magnified by the media, and they're of little help. But we hear them every day. And without questioning, we can easily adopt these probabilities as mental anchors, and anchoring on timeframes based on guesswork has the potential to exhaust us and have a detrimental effect on our well-being. Our power lies in understanding what we really know to be true and an acceptance of what we can and cannot control. The best leaders did not use uncertainty as an excuse for indecision. Many people led with vulnerability, saying, I need your help because I don't have the answers, or admitting that on reflection, this is what I could have done better. This style is nothing new, as many top sports teams and elite organisations like the Red Arrows have used this approach for many years. The problem is that in government and in many organisations and companies, The punishment for getting it wrong is greater than the reward for getting it right. This leads to bad decision-making and to silence becoming the default option. And if structural issues mean you are often not rewarded for bringing about savings or gains in other departments, then these silos are a big impediment on win-win policies. We need information, but we often don't know that we need it. And we should treat information as an opportunity to ask questions, not as armour to defend our views or preconceptions. As Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman tells us, when different people look at a problem, they come up with an interpretation of what they see that is widely more variable than people expect and are far wider than we are inclined to believe, which leads to things like inconsistent judicial sentencing, inconsistent lockdown restrictions, in fact, an inconsistent approach to myriad outcomes that profoundly affect our lives. During the pandemic, attitudes to people previously overlooked shifted. We have categorised key workers in the past, but now we recognise what we termed essential workers. The private openings of West End department stores for the wealthy became openings of supermarkets for those essential workers. If you employ staff or recruiting, then expect your people to be more vocal and to jump ship if discontented. You may have heard the term the Great Resignation. The result of short-sighted bottom-line focus at the expense of human connection can lead to a tide of cynicism in any company if the workplace is not collaborative. If it is seen as individualistic and greedy, it will stifle creativity. Expect post-pandemic employees to want to operate in a cohesive culture and to be motivated by meaning and purpose. We have purpose as individuals, and our businesses need purpose. If I asked any of you why you were here today, or why you were in business, I doubt any of you would say, so that I can just maintain a position on a hedonic treadmill of purchasing and materialism. And purpose-driven companies outperform their peers. They are the future thrivers. You ignore purpose at your peril. Through COVID, organisations placed an emphasis on psychological safety, and manufacturers stopped extolling the virtues of their products and told us how they were there for us, appealing to our emotions as we went through the grief curve. And the single most significant economic trend resulting from the COVID crisis is likely to be the very nature of work itself and how it is seen. In an instant, millions of people were required to work from home, and for many, the need to work from home has become a decision to continue to work from home. As a result, our personal and professional lives are intermingled. Children now see their parents not simply as family members, but as workers, and thus necessitating the need for a new social contract and a different understanding. The dynamics of home life have changed for many, and for many, a regular commute is a thing of the past. Sector-wise, arguably the biggest effect is on the medical profession. Telemedicine is a re-engineering of traditional healthcare systems to allow GPs and consultants to operate at a scale never envisaged. And because of the pandemic, we are more prepared and have become more accepting of these internet-based consultations. Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, believes that his company's greatest contribution to mankind will be about health through devices such as an Apple Watch, which is seen as a medical product. And if it takes your heart rate and blood pressure, you may want to look at the price first before putting it on. We will see wearable tech delivering real-time symptom data to clinicians, which combined with developments in neuroscience may help to diagnose and address the burgeoning issue of poor mental health. But one advisor summed up the benefits of technology at home and working from home so succinctly. He said, and I quote, "Without leaving the house, I can now work out within 10 minutes whether this prospective client is a time-wasting tosser or not." But whilst it is increasingly clear that remote work is a fantastic tool, it's an imperfect substitute for actual human contact. It leaves out the water cooler conversations, the accidental meeting and the collision of creative minds. Subtleties are lost in digital translation, making it a relatively low-grade connection. When you teleconference, you are spending social capital rather than building it. Maybe the best model is a hybrid one, and therefore a combination of digital and physical touch points. But a warning, a warning. As the lines between work and personal lives become blurred, we need to be very mindful that there is a big difference between working from home and living at work. The pandemic is likely to accelerate the change in the physical fabric of our towns and cities, and for some large areas, they will remain car-free. We are seeing the development of Barcelona's traffic-free superblocks, and Paris is seeking to become a 15-minute city with all amenities within a 15-minute walk or bike ride. Madrid, Milan, Ottawa and Seattle are among those to have declared plans to copy this approach. The C40 Cities Initiative, a city-led coalition focused on fighting climate change, now has 97 world cities, representing 700 million people and 25% of the global economy, and it is now promoting the 15-minute city as a blueprint for post-COVID recovery. Online shopping exploded during the pandemic. Shops will become the physical showrooms of online offerings whilst enhancing the customer experience using virtual reality, thus accelerating the existing trend towards the digital high street. Necessity may be the mother of invention, but is also the auntie of acceleration. And of course, there is debate about which of these changes will be long-lasting. Cryptocurrencies are likely to become more widely accepted. That exchange mechanism, so eloquently described as everything you don't know about money, combined with everything you don't know about computers. A high level of savings is unlikely to endure now that the restrictions are lifted, but the decline in cash usage is here to stay. And whilst the shift to digital banking has been accelerated, the pandemic confirmed the ongoing importance of some human interaction in banking services. Digital-only customers sought more in-person contact and engaged multiple channels for the first time. Non-fungible tokens, digital tokens that represent ownership of assets, is testing our very understanding of what ownership actually means. And whilst digital art has sold for millions and grabbed much of the publicity, NFTs are set to infiltrate many more areas of our lives. Just take the mortgage market, for instance. Last year, decentralized lender Bacon Protocol issued its first 7 mortgages amounting to $1.5 million as NFTs. The use of blockchain exchanges has implications for mortgage rates and approval processes and is a huge challenge for regulators. Blockchain technology and smart contracts are helping to expand the residential mortgage market beyond big banks and governments. How can we solve the housing crisis? Well, if we look at Eindhoven, the answer may be to print them. Last year, residents there moved into the first 3D printed house, and these can be printed in just 5 days. Giant 3D printers are providing homes for people in India, Germany, Italy, and the United States, where in Austin, Texas, the first entire neighborhood of 3D houses will be created this year. In 1989, Nobel Prize winner Joshua Lederberg stated, "We have changed our biological trajectory so much that contemporary man is a man-made species." The COVID-19 vaccine was rapidly developed using new techniques that I'll never understand. This may be the start of a biotech revolution or an acceleration of one that's already underway. Jeremy Farrar, director of the Wellcome Trust Foundation, says that scientists and politicians are already targeting a 100-day timeline from lab to jab, but Farrar thinks even that is too long. By identifying the 20 to 50 virus families in the animal kingdom with the greatest pandemic potential and building a library of advanced vaccines that can be ready with only minor alterations, he foresees cutting the timeline from genome to vaccine to just 7 days, with a global rollout within 30 days. The pandemic has highlighted different divides, and we saw that regarding the supply and availability of vaccines to different countries and communities. The digital divide between haves and have-nots regarding digital access became evident, and the urban-rural divide was also brought into focus, and electorally speaking has been described as the most significant fault line in the USA. Many of these growing inequalities will need to be addressed to prevent potential unrest. The just-in-time supply chains of a modern economy were also tested to breaking point, and the supply of toilet rolls will become a standard case study for GCSE economics students. Consumer behaviour and supply chains disconnected and will need to be reassessed. The emphasis has moved from cutting costs to building resilience and ensuring future capacity. And according to business surveys, a lot of businesses are reshoring operations closer to home. The concerning news is that, according to experts, supply issues will continue well past 2022. And we've come to understand how every part of the supply chain matters. Bicycle manufacture was halted for the lack of a single screw. A good friend of mine who runs one of the largest window manufacturing companies in the UK had to cease production for the lack of a small rubber bung that holds the glass in place as it is sealed. That component cost 20 pence. The whole pandemic evidenced that if something hasn't happened recently, we stop preparing for it. As university lectures moved online and lecturers found more novel and interesting ways to deliver their content online, the physical lecture is unlikely to be the central component of future degree models. It will be replaced by problems-based learning in smaller groups, and still the research shows that what differentiates colleges in the minds of the students is the physical space, and what they miss most was the sense that they have left home and are interacting with each other. How we produce food is changing, with an increase in the development of blue foods created on seabeds as we move from agriculture to aquaculture. And hopefully we will see increased cooperation regarding the production of energy. An example would be the 720-kilometre cable that connects Blythe in Northumberland with Gvildal, a small village in southwestern Norway. When wind generation in the UK will be high, but energy demand low, extra renewable power will be exported from the UK to Norway and conserve water in Norway's reservoirs. However, when the demand is high in the UK, but wind generation is low, hydropower from Norway will be imported. A biological metabolic rate is the amount of energy needed to keep an organism alive. And for humans, it's about 2,000 food calories per day. And that corresponds to around 90 watts, so enough to power a light bulb. According to Geoffrey West, the author of Scale, as social animals now living in cities, humans still only need the equivalent of a light bulb's worth of food per day to stay alive. But with heating, lighting, cars, planes and computers, the amount of energy needed to support an average person in the first world is now 11,000 watts. The social metabolic rate is the equivalent to the entire needs of 12 elephants per day. Imagine if each of us here were replaced with 12 elephants. So with this transition from the biological to the social, combined with population growth, we face increased energy and resource issues and the existential threat of climate change. And we are heading for a phase of climate-aligned investing. With better data, investors will be able to hold boards accountable. They will be joined by regulators around the world who start to call out financial firms, from investment managers to banks to insurers, who are engaging in greenwashing. And to fend off the accusations of greenwashing, clearer definitions and standards in the sector need to be established and seen as credible by the investing public, and this should include evidence of real-world impact that would not have happened anyway. The next generation of artificial intelligence will be the game changer of our lifetimes. It may accelerate automation, and therefore capital will be ever more prized over labour. This may intensify the debate around a universal basic income. Furlough was a form of this when the pandemic forced people from their jobs. Could the same argument be made for the consequences of AI? Will this then prompt a re-examination of the existential question about our sense of purpose? I wanted to share some examples today to illustrate how the pandemic is initiating and accelerating transformations in the world around us. The problem for our species has not been to arrive at solutions, it's been to find the political will to implement them. And before this all becomes a distant memory, maybe ask yourself, during the pandemic, did you change your personal focus? Did you experience more intense and present relationships with those that you were already closest to? Were you able to focus on what was important in life and let go of the extraneous elements? Our building blocks to happiness is mastery and competence over the things we are required to do, some autonomy and volition over our lives, and the relationships that we have. It is also what you pursue and why you pursue it. And so much research shows that rather than money, beauty, and popularity, well-being comes from pursuing growth, connection, and contribution. And during the pandemic, many learnt the difference between the pain of loneliness and the peace of solitude. From a personal perspective, please take that time to reflect and implement the positive lessons learned. There are more important things to take forward from all this than increased digital engagement and a more casual dress code. And at our next conference, maybe we'll be asking ourselves, where will this more casual dress code occur? In our physical world or in our digital world? Facebook's name change to Meta is clear evidence of the metaverse land grab that will occur. Where will you choose to spend your pixelated life and spend your chosen cryptos? Or maybe you prefer to stay physical and buy a printed house or a piece of digital art with virtual currency. And if that doesn't make you happy, take your cryptos into a metaverse and dress your avatar in Gucci. Either way, the well-being implications of this are certainly going to keep behavioural scientists busy for a very long time. Thank you for listening.